This is Jeff Mucci with RCR Wireless News. We're in the speaker lounge at TC3 for day 2. We're going to open up with a discussion with Jim Deleskie, who is founder of Mimir Networks.
Yes, thank you very much.
So before we go into the technology, you got to tell us about the name of the company. Where'd you derive the name?
So Mimir Networks is from Norse mythology.
Yep.
So kind of the god of wisdom, and Odin, the god of the gods, the king of the gods, the father of the gods, actually cut Mimir's head off so that he could always have wisdom with him wherever he went.
Yep.
Now I don't know how well that works in reality, but you know, for the Norse, it seemed to work.
And you're from Nova Scotia.
Yes, we are.
So technology innovation, how'd you come to start Mimir Networks, and then talk about the technology?
So my background is from large-scale networks. So I've worked for and with most of the large carriers in the world. And in my last engagement, I kind of had the flexibility to be where I wanted to be.
Right.
So I was in Nova Scotia. I grew up in Nova Scotia. And when I decided to start the company, I thought, well, I'm here. It's as good a place to do it as any. I mean, the reality for doing a startup is you need an idea, you need really good internet, you need electricity, you need a place to be. And we've got all those things.
Well, I'm looking at your website here, and it talks about $1 trillion worth of value getting lost to security issues. Tell us about the technology and how do you address that issue?
So what we look at is DDoS detection and then the mitigation. So DDoS is one of the biggest problems in the internet right now. We all hear about it all the time in the news. We've tracked in excess of 4,000 attacks a day around the world going towards different places. And many of those are still the short 5 minutes and they're done, nobody sees it. But you do get attacks that will take down you know, an e-commerce site for a day and a half. So if you're a large entity like Dell, who's processing billions of dollars a year on the internet, and you lose a day and a half of revenue, that cash flow still hurts even though you're that size company. And we see this more and more. So it's used to be just people it would be an extortion play, or it would be, I don't like you for some reason. You know, you're playing a game and you beat me. But we're seeing more it move into people with different ideological slants on things. So I don't like your political party, you don't like my political party. And the tools have become so easy to use and get now that they can launch attacks anybody can against anybody. I didn't get a job at the Subway, and I'm going to attack Subway even though the local franchise has nothing to do with me getting a job or not. So we're seeing more of this type of thing. And we have the ability to look at the traffic that's coming into a website or an e-commerce portal and distinguish the legitimate traffic from the bad traffic. So when we identify the anomalies, we can alert the operator and say, hey, this isn't right, what would you like to do about it? And in some cases, they choose to let it go through still because it's not impacting.
Right.
And it's always safer to not mess with the traffic. However, when it is impactful, then they'll choose to mitigate the attack. We divert the traffic to a scrubbing center, either theirs or something in the cloud that we can help them with for them. And it carries on like normal for everybody, so the customer is still able to be served.
So what's the secret sauce behind your technology and your company?
Lots of math and a little bit of magic. So we don't talk in detail about the exact algorithms because if we disclose what we do, then the bad guys will find a way to game it. And they'll work on that anyway.
Right.
So basically what we do is we look at building mathematical models around what normal traffic looks like for that customer. And then we look for the anomalies in that. So we look at a whole bunch of different variables to determine what isn't normal. So we have to be able to make sure that we don't alert on things like you happen to get listed on Slashdot or Reddit, and your traffic volume has gone up by 200%. Obviously,
that's good traffic.
That's good traffic. We don't want to block any of that. So we had to make sure that our algorithms are smart enough to be able to identify it's just more of the same thing, and it's still all good. Versus, wait a minute, I'm getting 100,000 requests a minute now from China, and I've never talked to anybody from China before, right? So that's kind of the extreme, and that was really easy to spot, but you had to make sure we kind of balance those two plays.
So when was the company founded, and who are your customers?
So we're
what
working.
Types of customers?
So the types of customers that we're looking at are everybody from the tier 1 carriers, obviously, to the tier 2s and the data centers. So we're working with a CLEC here in California right now. We've been testing with them for the last little while. We're talking to some data centers in Chicago and New York. And we've actually had some really interesting meetings here with some of the larger tier 1s. And having come from that space, it gives us a lot of credibility, being able, we speak the same language effectively, right? If you've never dealt with telecoms before, you know, actually one of the guys that works for me, one of my software guys, yesterday he said, what do you mean when you say prem? And if you work in the telecom space, everybody knows if you're saying we put the box in the prem. Everybody knows what it means. But if you're a software developer, you don't know what that is.
Yeah.
So it allows us to have those types of conversations that a lot of startups might have an issue with because they just have to learn the language first.
Got it.
So it gives us some credibility there.
What's your business model?
So our business model, we can either follow the traditional model where we can sell you the appliances, you use them to protect your network or customers, either purely for the protection or as an upsell. Or we can work with the carrier, whether it's a tier 2 or a data center or anybody in between, where we can deploy stacks of equipment and work on a rev share model with them. So we will help de-risk not just their network security, but we actually help de-risk the CapEx expense of deploying the equipment. And in that model, as with all of our models, we'll help the customer kind of work out and flesh out what the business models will look like for a managed service, and then as well as supporting the equipment itself.
Got it. And you talked about the ability to divert traffic.
Yes.
And scrub that traffic. That starts to sound a lot like a policy engine and an enforcement engine to some degree, so you set up kind of triggers. If this happens, do this. Is that in fact part of your service?
So in many ways it is like a policy engine. We recommend against auto mitigation. A lot of people like the idea of it because it simplifies things. They don't need to train up NOC engineers and SOC engineers as much to be able to identify those things. But again, you're always concerned with any type of security solution of blocking legitimate customers.
Yep.
And I've heard some people say, oh, we've built a system that is 100% trustworthy. You never have to worry about our solution.
Yep.
But in 20 years of working in telecom, I've heard many companies say that, many of which have billion-dollar valuations, and I still don't trust anybody implicitly. In my networks, I always wanted to make sure that we had an engineer looking at it and validating changes before we pushed them out. And with our security solution, we can auto-mitigate if you want, but we still recommend against customers doing that. You always want somebody to vet that and make sure it's really what you want to do.
Yeah. Final question. Mobile networks are now all IP networks.
Yes.
What impact has mobile had on this issue in your business?
So, from my point of view, a mobile network is just another network. It's you're changing out the transport layer if we're looking at the OSI model, and everything else is the same. Because we're not building specific profiles of this is what traffic should look like, and we're doing those dynamically for every individual network. Our equipment looks much the same in the way it works. Now, from an attack perspective, if you've got a whole bunch of people now, billions of people in the world that have cell phones, as we start moving towards, not just the 4G stuff, but the 5G LTE stuff, and you can start getting, gigabit speeds now from a mobile device that happens to be in California one day, in Toronto the next, Austin the day after that, because somebody's moving around. There's some of those things that are a bit different. People can pop up, launch an attack, and they're gone seconds later, never to be seen from the same location. So I think that we'll see an increase in using mobile as a source for attacks. I like to use the example, everybody talks about DDoS and the volumetric attacks. 400 gig attacks always make the news. But the reality is they're not the impactful attacks. I've seen attacks that were 2 megabits a second before take down Fortune 500 companies. So now if I can do that on my mobile phone while I'm driving to work in the morning because I'm bored, there will be some stuff that comes from that. Our expectation is that we'll be able to manage it the same way we do now.
We're going to take a short break and then we're going to come back and talk about Nova Scotia as a technology center.
Excellent, thank you very much.
Thank you.